Oh, class.
Oh, yes.
Classy class.
Yes, yes.
Good morning. So today we're going to be learning about theme and main ideas of a poem that we're going to read today called Paul Revere's Ride. Does anybody know what theme already means, or do we need to go over it again? Anybody raise their hand and tell me what theme may be? Yes.
Is that what the story is kind of about?
The theme is like what the story is about, or it's called the main idea of the story. So we're going to try to find the main idea of a poem today. Does anybody remember what point of view means? Anybody want to raise their hand? Yes.
Who's talking?
Who's talking? So how do we know if we're talking in first person point of view? What would the author be saying? I, me, right. And if we're talking in second person,
They. He, she.
that's third person. Second person is when they're saying us, like we are all together in the story. They're not talking at us, they're not talking at us, they're not talking to us, right? They're talking like we're all together. Okay, so our objective for today is, given the poem Paul Revere's Ride, which is the poem that we're going to be reading today, the student will be able to read the poem and identify the theme of the poem. We're going to read the poem together, and then you guys are going to go off into pairs and talk about what you think the theme of the poem is, as well as create a summary of the poem with at least 3 details from the poem to support your answer. So with the summary, you can either write a paragraph of the summary together as your pairs, or you can create a storyboard together as a pairs, or you can do a story map, which you just do the little boxes and write details about what happened in the story. So those are your 3 options today. We're going to talk a little bit about Paul Revere's Ride. It was written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and the story is about war. The poem is about war. And Paul Revere going to see if the British were coming through land, or if they were coming by sea, so that they could let everybody know, so that when the British got there, they already knew the British were there. So this is a pretty long poem about Paul Revere's Ride. I'm going to give these to you, and I want you to look through the pages and find any words that you think you don't know. I'll give you a couple minutes and write them on your whiteboards and find any words that you may not know, and we'll go over them before we read. Like another 10 seconds. Okay, do we want to hold up our whiteboards and see what words we may not know? Good. We have belfry arch. The belfry arch that is talked about a lot in our poem today is the arch on top of a church where the bell swings to let you know that church is beginning, or they're playing a song on it, but it's the bell at the top of where is the big arch on the church. Another word that we have is rafters. The rafters is like the planks of wood that are like on top of a building like before the ceiling, before the roof, is called the rafters. Good, so those are 2 words that we now know in our poem. So we're going to go ahead and begin our poem. You guys have it at your desk, and I want you guys to read along as we have our speaker reading for us.
On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, "If the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower as a signal light."
Did everybody hear that? The belfry arch, where they're going to hang their lanterns to see if it's by land or by sea.
1 if by land, and 2 if by sea, and I on the opposite shore will be, ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm, for the country folk to be up and to arm. Then he said, "Good night," and with muffled oar silently rowed to the Charlestown shore, just as the moon rose over the bay, where swinging wide at her moorings lay the Somerset, British man-of-war. A phantom ship with each mast and spar across the moon like a prison bar, and a huge black hulk that was magnified by its own reflection in the tide. Meanwhile his friend through alley and street wanders and watches with eager ears, till in the silence around him he hears the muster of men at the barrack door, the sound of arms and the tramp of feet, and the measured tread of the grenadiers marching down to their boats on the shore. Then he climbed the tower of the old North Church by the wooden stairs with stealthy tread to the belfry chamber overhead, and startled the pigeons from their perch on the somber rafters that round him made masses and moving shapes of shade. By the trembling ladders, steep and tall, to the highest window in the wall, where he paused to listen and looked down a moment on the roofs of the town and the moonlight flowing over all. Beneath, in the churchyard, lay the dead, in their night encampment on the hill, wrapped in silence so deep and still that he could hear like a sentinel's tread the watchful night wind, as it went creeping along from tent to tent and seeming to whisper, "All is well." A moment only he feels the spell of the place and the hour, and the secret dread of the lonely belfry and the dead. For suddenly all his thoughts are bent on a shadowy something far away, where the river widens to meet the bay, a line of black that bends and floats on the rising tide like a bridge of boats.
So what do you think is going to happen? What did he just find? Can anybody tell me what he just found? They found the British coming by boat. So, what do you think is going to happen next in the poem? He's going to put how many lights?
2.
2 lights in the belfry, because he just found out they're coming by boat. So now he's going to go and put the 2 lights in the arch, and then he's going to go tell everybody that they're coming.
Opposite shore walked Paul Revere. Now he patted his horse's side, now gazed at the landscape far and near, then impetuous stamped the earth and turned and tightened his saddle girth. But mostly he watched with eager search the belfry tower of the old North Church, as it rose above the graves on the hill, lonely and spectral and somber and still. And lo, as he looks on the belfry's height, a glimmer and then a gleam of light. He springs to the saddle, the bridle he turns, but lingers and gazes till full on his sight a second lamp in the belfry burns. A hurry of hoofs in a village street, a shape in the moonlight, a bulk in the dark, and beneath from the pebbles in passing, a spark struck out by a steed flying fearless and fleet. That was all, and yet through the gloom and the light, the fate of a nation was riding that night, and the spark struck out by that steed in his flight kindled the land into flame with its heat. He has left the village and mounted the steep, and beneath him, tranquil and broad and deep, is the mystic meeting the ocean tides, and under the alders that skirt its edge, now soft on the sand, now loud on the ledge, is heard the tramp of his steed as he rides. It was 12 by the village clock when he crossed the bridge into Medford town. He heard the crowing of the cock and the barking of the farmer's dog, and felt the damp of the river fog that rises after the sun goes down. It was 1 by the village clock when he galloped into Lexington.
So where did he just go? At 12 o'clock, he was at where?
Medford Town.
He was in Medford Town, and then at 1, he's at Lexington, and by 2, that we haven't read yet, he's going to be at Concord. So in a 2-hour span, he has rode his horse all across town to tell everyone about the British coming. So they all know before they get there that they're there to attack them.
Windows blank and bare gaze at him with a spectral glare, as if they already stood aghast at the bloody work they would look upon. It was 2 by the village clock when he came to the bridge in Concord town. He heard the bleating of the flock and the twitter of birds among the trees, and felt the breath of the morning breeze blowing over the meadows brown. And one was safe and asleep in his bed, who at the bridge would be first to fall, who that day would be lying dead, pierced by a British musket ball. You know the rest. In the books you have read how the British regulars fired and fled, how the farmers gave them ball for ball from behind each fence and farmyard wall, chasing the redcoats down the lane, then crossing the fields to emerge again under the trees at the turn of the road, and only pausing to fire and load. So through the night rode Paul Revere, and so through the night went his cry of alarm to every Middlesex village and farm, a cry of defiance and not of fear, a voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For borne on the night wind of the past, through all our history to the last, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will waken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of that steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere.
All right. So, can anybody tell me on their whiteboards what point of view this poem was written in at the beginning of the poem? The very first stanza of that poem, can anybody tell me what point of view it was written in? I'll give you a couple minutes. Okay, we're going to hold our boards up and let's see what we have. First person, good. That's right. How do we know that it's in first person?
Because he was you.
Because he's saying
My
you.
children.
Right. So he's talking to us, saying, you, my children. And by the end of the poem, what point of view is he talking in? Can we look at the last stanza of your poem? There's a word in there that tells us what our, right. So what point of view is our? Does anybody know? If you don't know, it's okay. We'll go over it. It's second point of view because we're talking together as our. So I want you guys to think about that as you go off into your pairs for your project. We're going to be doing theme. You're going to have to figure out the theme of the story. And then you get to pick the story map, the storyboard, or write a paragraph on the summary of the poem. So we're going to be thinking about point of view and why I pointed out it goes from first person to second person. So we're going to do our projects, and then we're going to come back together as a group and discuss what we have found. Okay, so we have done our projects. We have done our theme. Everybody's picked whether they want to do storyboards, story maps, or summaries. And now we're going to talk about what actually happened in Paul Revere's poem here. I have found a little comic strip that really tells us what happens. So we talked about in the beginning of the poem that he's going to hang one lantern if they come by land, and two if they come by sea. So he sits on the opposite shore and waits. I will wait on the opposite shore from where I can easily ride to warn other towns. So he waits for those lanterns to go up, and as soon as they go up, he goes and tells them. So in the poem is talking about he sees all the dead people in the cemetery. He says it's scary up here, and he's waiting and waiting, saying, hurry up. So then we talked about when I stopped the poem, how he was at Medford town by 12 a.m., and then by 1 a.m. he was at Lexington, and then by 2 he was at Concord. If I can pull this up here. I'll reach Concord by 2 a.m. So it took him 2 hours to get all across town and tell all these people that the British were coming. So now the British show up, and they said, how did you know that we were coming? Everybody already knew that the British were coming because of Paul Revere's ride. So I thought that was a pretty cool little comic to show you guys. So we talked about the point of view of our poem right before we went into our pairs. And we said that our poem starts in first person because he's talking to us and talking about I am doing this and I am doing that and I'm doing this. And then at the end of the poem, he talks about our, and how we talked about that's a second person point of view because he's talking with us as we are part of it. So does anybody know why I might have pointed out that? Did anybody figure out that that might be part of the theme of the poem? Does anybody really understand? What did we put over here for our theme of the poem?
We put that he refers to us by our and including us in the poem to show that the United States is all together.
That's very good. They are right on what we're going to be talking about. So the theme of the poem is that he talks about what I did for all this to save the United Nations back then. Is that what that was called? We're now the United States. United Nations need to be together in order for all this to happen. If Paul Revere didn't go and tell all those people that the British were coming, we would have been in big, big, big trouble. So the theme of that poem is that we need to stay together as the United States, and that's why he's talking about our, because he wants us to be a combined group of people that stick together. That's very good. I'm proud of you guys. Okay, so we talked about our point of view. We talked about how the point of view changed. We talked about how that's the theme of our story. And now we're going to go back and make sure that our objective was what we needed to do today. So we have given the poem, Paul Revere's Ride. The student will be able to read the poem and identify the theme, which we did, as well as create a summary which everybody created their summary with their story map, their storyboard, or their paragraph and their pairs with at least 3 details from the poem to support their answer. So everybody met those standards today. Very good. So that is all today.